This is Andrea Kane, and I'm here with you for HIT 445, and we are on week one. And I'm going to stop and apologize for my voice. I've been recording videos, and so my voice is getting a little bit rough. I apologize for that. Anyway, week one, we are going to cover chapters 1 through 4. This is the first of 4 lecture videos for this week. It is on chapter 1, which is introducing us to the history of performance improvement. So if you are looking at your syllabus, we are covering this week objectives from 9.1.1 through 9.1.5, 9.2.3, 9.3.1, 9.3.3, 9.3.4, 9.3.5, 9.5.1, and 9.5.2, in case you're wondering. All right, let's talk about it. Our learning objectives are to summarize the historical events that have contributed to modern performance improvement programs, relate how key legislation has influenced healthcare quality initiatives, and talk about how key individuals and organizations have shaped the theory and developed models for use in performance improvement activities. In the 1700s, and if you want to follow along in your textbook, if you want to follow along, it starts on page 3. And then the history starts really on page 4 and 5. There's a great table 1.1 on page 5 in your book that I would really encourage you to look at. I'm going to kind of skim over it here in our lecture because it's right in your book and it explains what happened and how it happened and who was involved. I will tell you that on your quiz this week, there's not a whole lot of this. Do you need to know some of this information? Yes, sort of, on a basic familiarity. Will it be on your quiz? Odds are not. Will it be on the RHIT exam? Odds are not, but at least you're going to be familiar with it. So 1700s, you had some things happening there. You had the Pennsylvania Hospital becoming the first real model hospital in the United States. In 1760, you had New York State starting medical licensure of providers. In 1771, you have New Jersey getting on board doing medical licensure. In the 1800s, Mass General in Boston gets really involved in clinical practice and granting of clinical privileges, what we would call today privileging. And then in 1853, they established the first disease and procedure index. They started classifying patient disposition. In the mid-1800s, medical licensure was deemed undemocratic and stopped. And then you get to the 1900s. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back. 1872, you have the New England Hospital for Women and Children organizing a general training school for nurses. So you start to see some consistency there. Undoubtedly, the influence of Florence Nightingale, even though she was busy with other things. In 1874, you have the American Medical Association encouraging the creation of independent state licensing boards. So you see that physician licensure piece starting to come back into play. 1900s, the state of North Carolina starts passing the first nurse registration bill, making sure that nurses are being tracked as well as physicians. In 1910, the Flexner Report came out. The Flexner Report is really landmark in that it talked about how horrible, for lack of a better word, how terrible the variation in medical school training was, and how you had some physicians that were taught in a wonderful way, and you had other schools that were churning out physicians who really were quite dangerous. And so the Flexner Report really brought this to the forefront and made it clear that medical schools needed to have a basic standardization of skills that they taught physicians. 1917, you've got the American College of Surgeons establishing the hospital standardization program. 1920, you've got more rigorous academic standards. 1946, this is a critical one. You need to know the Hill-Burton Act. That was established to establish funding to build new hospitals. So I would say this slide right here, you need to know everything that is on this slide right here. Please make sure that you are aware of the dates and the topics. We've got 1952 with Joint Commission being formed, 1965 where Medicare and Medicaid were established, 1972 when peer review organizations are now formed. 1980s, we get to prospective payment systems. 1990s, Joint Commission reinvents itself for the first time of many times over, and they start integrating quality improvement. It was where Deming's TQM philosophy finally is catching on, becoming a little more popular. In the 2000s, you have APCs coming into play. You have HCFA transforming into CMS. You have Joint Commission implementing national patient safety goals and unannounced tracer methodology surveys. Again, they reinvent themselves, and now they're the Joint Commission instead of JCAHO. You have MSDRGs implemented. You have, and of course, going back here to 2000-ish, they didn't put it in here, but you have HIPAA legislation. But then they show you in 2009 how ARRA brought in high tech. Then 2010, Affordable Care Act, and then 2015, where you have the implementation finally of ICD-10. And this now brings us up in your book to, let's see here. Where are we at? I think this is probably, I got it going on these slides. I think, well, this starts on page 4 and it continues all the way to page 12. But you've got healthcare institutions starting to care about quality and implementing performance improvement. You have medical practice focusing, becoming more standardized, looking at consistent ways of doing medical training. Same thing with nursing. You've got all the licensure and for physicians, credentialing and privileging. For nurses, their state boards. Allied health professionals determining whether they needed to be licensed or not by each state. And each area is now looking at how can they prove that they're providing quality. What kind of performance improvement activities for patient care need to be taking place. And you have some historically significant contributions of individual health professionals. You get to hospital standardization and accreditation, looking at a minimum set of standards that all hospitals have to meet through federal regulations or state regulations or accreditation. On page 11, this starts at page 11, you see that until World War II, most healthcare was still provided in the home. Quality in healthcare services was considered a byproduct of physicians' appropriate medical practice and oversight. And there were both positives and negatives that came along with that. But in the 1950s, the number of hospitals grew to support developments in diagnostic, therapeutic, and surgical technology and pharmacology. And this is where you see the Hill-Burton Act of 1946, how that funding to create hospitals really caused the number of hospitals to grow across the country and really made it so that the hospital was the center of care for several decades. You've got the hospital standardization program being replaced by Joint Commission or other approved agencies, because there are a couple. Joint Commission just happens to be the most popular, the biggest, sort of a monopoly, but not quite. Then you've got Medicare and Medicaid coming in 1965. And that brought in some quality assurance activities, retrospective payment programs. Those have then transitioned into value-based purchasing, and then the Affordable Care Act had some influence on that. Then you've got managed care coming into being and accountable care organizations, which are the most recent iteration of all of this. We're now up to page 14 in your book. So let's talk about the evolution of quality in healthcare. And there are some big names we're going to talk about: Deming, Crosby, Geron, and Donabedian. And they are here on pages 14 and 15. You can read through about these, about what they came up with and their processes and how those were involved with healthcare. I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail because you can just read it. But I will tell you, you need to know the assessment of healthcare from four perspectives: structure, process, outcome, cost. You need to know those four and what their definitions are. Hint, hint, hint. On your quiz, you need to know this. So structure, process, outcome, cost. These are on page 15 in your book. Make sure you know the four and make sure you know what each one is. And that is it for our slides on Chapter 2. Try and go through the review questions. Make sure you do the check your understanding. That will all help you as you prepare for your quiz. I'm sorry, I said Chapter 2, didn't I? I meant Chapter 1. I'm getting ahead of myself here. So excited to get into Chapter 2 because it's actually getting into performance improvement models, not just talking about history. All right, well, that's it for Chapter 1 of Week 1. I'll be back with Chapters 2, 3, and 4 as their own individual lecture videos shortly. Talk to you again soon. Bye.